Welcome into this SportsZone All Access. It is Monday, October the 27th. It's crazy to believe, but we will be in November at this time next week.
Wild.
Cruising right through it. Now, what Ian might be happy about is a week from tomorrow.
Today? No, a week from today.
Week from today. Is it a week from today? It is a week from
Monday.
Today. Right, Saturday's the 1st. Right, that was the day off. Week from today is the start of college basketball, which for some of you might be happy. Some of you might not want basketball. Here it comes. Either way, you don't have a choice. In fact, we got some preseason action already going in many leagues, a lot this week specifically. But we're going to talk football. We're going to talk a lot of it today. We got high school football to talk about, and that's the main basis of the show. But we've got to start with a couple of big headlines, one in pro football, one in college football. We start with the pros, where a couple of locals made their names known. That was SDSU former tight end greats Tucker Kraft and Dallas Goedert. Tucker Kraft was fantastic last night, Ian. He was simply sensational in their win over the Pittsburgh Steelers. The former Timberlake native, well, you can't call him a former native. He is a native, Timberlake native. 7 catches, 143 yards, and 2 touchdowns on National Tight End Day. He got into it. He's up to 6 touchdowns, tied for third in the NFL. He's rolling right now, and it was a huge force last night. If you watch the game, he was turning heads with what he was doing.
Yeah, that he was. Absolutely sensational in the game last night, and we've seen kind of a build toward this throughout his time in Green Bay. We thought, okay, he's making his name known, and that was, I want to say, his coming out party, even though, of course, here in South Dakota know all too well what Tucker Kraft is able to do, but just incredible. The first touchdown, okay, fine. It was the second one that was like, whoa, okay, a second touchdown now on national TV. And as we talked about it before we came on today, vaunting him into one of the top 5 spots in terms of receiving touchdowns for all positions so far this season.
Yeah, Dallas Goedert, 3 catches, 28 yards. He had 2 touchdowns as well. So Dallas Goedert tied with Amon-Ra St. Brown, 7 touchdowns on the year. Best in the NFL, tied for first. Tucker Kraft is right behind him, tied for third with a lot of guys. Devontae Adams, Michael Pittman, Jake Ferguson, George Pickens. Yeah, there's a talented list there. And Dallas Goedert, much like Kraft, he's been a big target in the red zone, and that's been leading to his success.
They've been letting me get the ball and use my big body to fall into the end zone. I did that on the first touchdown today. But it's cool. We can score in many different ways. We got a lot of different people, and I've just been trying to do the most with my opportunities.
Well, he's doing the most with his opportunities. 7 touchdowns on 30 catches this year in 39 targets. His numbers don't jump off the board at you, but his touchdowns sure do. And Tucker Kraft is getting a lot more yards. He's actually at 470 yards this season. So both of them stars, I tell you that much. And we and this is for Goddard, seeing him have a little more rhythm than he's had in the last few seasons. He's already at a season high in touchdowns. He set that like in week 3 and has continued that success. And Tucker Kraft last night set all career highs in a Sunday night game. So also their hometown bar in Timberlake featured on Sunday Night Football. Ian had something on that last night. Kelly Volk's doing a full story on that. So expect that tonight on KELOLAND. Who's at 6? Really cool stuff there. But we got to also talk about the Dakota marker. Ian, this is a gigantic game that happened on Saturday. I'll tell you the truth. I only got to see bits and pieces of it while we were in between speeches and supper at my brother's wedding. So actually, congrats to my brother, Drew, and his new wife, Ashley. But with that being said, unfortunately, I wasn't able to watch the whole thing. I followed it in the first quarter. By the time I turned it back on in the second quarter, I went, whoa, what is going on here? And that was kind of the thing that came to my head here, Ian, was I was really impressed with how NDSU played in this game specifically.
How they played throughout the whole game, just utter domination. You could look at much of the box score that indicates that, but it was the dictation of the game right out of the jump. It was one of the best atmospheres right at kickoff that I've ever experienced. Mm-hmm. Any game, any level, any sport, anything. And NDSU gets the ball, marches right down the field. They take a ton of time off the clock. They punch it in and then force a 3-and-out for SDSU. That was kind of really settled the crowd down a lot, and we're just 2 drives into the game. and then they continue to roll. 3 touchdowns on their first 3 drives, 3 3-and-outs for SDSU, and it almost kind of felt like the game was over at that point, even though SDSU then got their touchdown and cut it to 14, but just a dominant performance for the Bison.
Yeah, no question. They outrushed them 257-43. Not many teams hold SDSU in the past several years to 43 rushing yards. Held them to a total of 166 yards of offense. While they were dominated, the biggest message afterwards, didn't matter who you talked to, SDSU has one plan, and that's on bouncing back and getting everything righted after this tough loss.
Right now, this one cuts deep as expected, and our players will respond the right way. I've got zero worry about that.
When you devote so much time and effort into beating somebody and it doesn't go the way you want it to, it's tough.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think that's pretty clear to say it. But I think this is a wake-up call. We've seen third downs be a big problem. We've seen the defense actually kind of digress throughout the season, right? They gave up 400 yards of offense to Murray State 2 weeks ago, and we've seen these things start to happen, and it was almost like winning can cover some problems sometimes. I'm not saying these are mega problems like sound the alarms. They're still one of the best teams in the country. But if they want to get to the national championship, I'm not talking winning it. I'm talking get to the national championship. They got a lot of things to fix, the Jackrabbits do. And this is a great opportunity for them to look internally and say, here's those things that we knew were problems. We got to fix them.
Yeah, I think it's a great wake-up call when you think about they played Montana State super early in the season, one of the other 5 best teams in the country, and they came out with a win there. And then the schedule hasn't been as tough in the time between the Montana State game and here. So you can kind of let a couple of things maybe fall through the cracks a little bit. But now you have a great wake-up call with just a couple of weeks left in the regular season before the playoffs start. It brings me back to, I know I'm a big college basketball fan, but an analogy that I'd like to make. When Baylor played Gonzaga in the national championship a couple of years ago, and Baylor wiped the floor with Gonzaga, it was 2 best teams all year long. They were supposed to play in the regular season that year, and they didn't because of COVID. They canceled the game. Gonzaga said if we had played them in the regular season, the title game might have been different because we would have seen what we needed to do. And I feel like this is what SDSU, okay, now we see what we need to do to compete with the best in the country.
We'll see. SDSU falls all the way to 5, and they got some tough games yet. They still got number 10 North Dakota on the list, USD down in Vermilion yet on the list. Got some big games coming up for them. Now, quickly, we're going to move into high school football here and talk 11 AAA and 11 AA. We'll go through all the 7 classes. We'll start with 11 AAA. And this is the way that the bracket looks. Last week, we saw some scores go certain ways, including a big one. Jefferson beating Brandon Valley. We'll talk about that in a second. O'Gorman finishes the year strong. Lincoln beats Harrisburg in an insane game. There was 105 points scored in that game. And so Lincoln holds on to the 2 seed. Harrisburg falls to the 5 seed. And you know what's crazy? O'Gorman and Harrisburg separated by not much. It was pretty tight. Ended up being separated by a single game. And when you go back to that first game of the year, when O'Gorman came back and beat them, would have been the difference in this game. But because of Jefferson actually beating Brandon Valley, it changed things up because O'Gorman would have been tied with Jefferson had Brandon Valley won, and then Jefferson would have been the 4 and O'Gorman the 3. Nevertheless, all that conversation for another day. Let's talk about the game that happened, the big one, Brandon Valley losing to Jefferson. How about the Cavaliers, man? They're scrappy, and it's one of those things where we've seen it a couple times now. If they're in a game in the fourth quarter, they're dangerous.
Yeah, that they are. And we saw that, as you see on the graphic right there, winning on a late field goal. Neither team pulling away in this game, and it coming down to that late score, and just a really good test for the playoffs coming up, because now we know we've kind of said it all year long. It feels like there's a big 3 in 11 AAA of Brandon Valley, Lincoln, and Jefferson. This kind of proves it. Look at how they did against each other, all going 1-1.
I'm intrigued. I think that Washington-Jefferson game, this first round of the playoffs, is going to be a good one. We'll talk about that later. Let's talk to 11 AA now, and got some good games going on here in 11 AA, including a rematch of last week, Ian, and let's jump right into that one. Huron and Brookings, our game of the week last week. Huron poised to be the number one team in 11AA, and Brookings beats them at home 22-14. A great game of the week that you were on the call for.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. The Brookings defense really shined in this game, holding the Huron offense out of the end zone, really not really threatening much of the game. It was much of a defensive struggle. Brookings didn't find much rhythm offensively either, but they had a couple of big explosive plays that led to touchdowns, as you see one right there. And the Bobcats, now it's kind of fun. You have a week to repair, dissect that game film, and we'll see what adjustments both coaches make.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Brookings needed that win to cement them into the playoffs. Now they do. Now they get Huron. So that's kind of the fun part of seeing how that'll all shake out. Now, we're going to have a Thursday high school football breakdown show. We'll go through all the brackets and talk about that more. We're just kind of showing you today, kind of recapping what we saw last week. Also last week, Yankton winning big. Watertown, a great game in 4 overtimes over Aberdeen Central. Pierre, blowout win. The Governors, look out. They're playing really good football right now. And we'll dissect all that on Thursday and we preview high school football. We're going to move to 11A and 11B when we come back. This is SportsZone All Access. Welcome back to SportsZone All Access. A lot to talk about today. We've started in 11 AAA and 11 AA, kind of recapping what we saw last week. Let's continue that conversation in 11A. And last week in 11A, we saw some impactful scores. We saw a Sioux Falls Christian team finish off an undefeated season, 40-9 win over Dakota Valley. That's why they're the 1 seed, getting to play Rapid City Christian. Kind of a fun little matchup there. The two have faced off this year. Rapid City Christian, was late in the game, but did score the most points against Sioux Falls Christian of any team that's played them this year. Del Rapids Lennox, a big win there for the Orioles. Madison, big win up in Millbank against a pair of 6-2 teams. And this is the way the bracket shakes out. There's a lot of good games. We'll talk about those in our quarterfinal preview show on Thursday, but we're still talking about last week. Big win for the Lennox Orioles going up to Del Rapids in a 2 versus 3 rankings. But Lennox was the 5 seed entering last week. They're now the 3 seed, getting them a home playoff game, getting them on the opposite side of Sioux Falls Christian on the bracket. This was a big win for Lennox in the standings, and they looked really good as well.
Yeah, we knew it was going to be a good game. We knew it would be a big game, and with a lot of seeding implications. And I didn't realize just how much was at stake for Lennox in that game, but they looked really impressive in that one. And who knows, maybe we could see that now in the semifinals. That'd be a lot of fun.
We could see, and that's the thing, Del Rapids, they held their own in the standings, so they're still the 2 seeds. So could see a rematch on this same field here next week if both teams win in the first round. We'll have to see. But Lennox seems to be really figuring it out right now. Offensively, they're scoring more points than they have all season. Over the last several weeks, they looked good against a really good Del Rapids team last week. So look out. The Orioles are figuring it out, and that's kind of what they did last year, Ian, on their way to the Dome. They figured it out late in the season. Let's talk 11B. Here's the playoff brackets and the results of that. Elk Point Jefferson, no surprise. And that's nothing against Flandreau. That's just how good the Huskies have been this year, rolling past Flandreau. Sioux Valley, great win over Parker. Dual pulling away from McCook Central. Montrose, Wagner beats Chamberlain in a 33-0 blowout. St. Thomas More winning big against Hot Springs. Mount Vernon Blankington over Mobridge Pollock. Clark Willow Lake over Groton area in a shutout there. And one thing you'll see in all of these playoff brackets, the 13, 14, and 15, 16 seeds, those bottom 4 seeds got smoked in a lot of games. I almost feel like you could make a first-round bye for the first 4 teams and set those 4 aside because they're starting to get hammered. But in that conversation, you got to keep the 11 seed around because a winner beating Woonsocket, Wessington Springs, Sanborn Central. Ian, it was a great game. We knew it was going to be. We sent a photographer all the way up to Wessington Springs and got our money's worth. The defending state champs weren't ready to go home yet, making some crazy plays like this one. Blocked punt, takes it to the goal line, fumbles on the goal line. His teammate recovers to get a touchdown. There's a lot of crazy plays in this one, but winner, there's something about them. When it turns to late October football, they're as tough a team as anyone in the state.
Even though they didn't have maybe the regular season that they're used to having.
Certainly.
you know that when it's playoff time, there's just that winning tradition there with the Warriors that they're going to be ready and they're going to give a fight to just about anyone. They pull off the upset and just a really impressive win. Now we'll see if they can maybe keep it going, pull off another upset in the quarterfinals to get to the semis once again.
Clark Willow Lake, I think that should be a good game. I think these are two really good teams, and Clark Willow Lakes, they're 8-1. They're playing some really good football. So look out for the Cyclones and Warriors. Should be a really good game coming up on Thursday, and we'll preview all that in Thursday's show. But we're going to talk 9-man football when we come back. This is Sports Zone All Access. Welcome back to SportsZone All Access. We've talked the 4 11-man classes. We're now going to dive into talking 9-man. Let's start right into it. 9AA, Ian. And in these classes, there wasn't a ton of surprise. Kimball White Lake was an upset over Brenton Heckler, so credit to Kimball White Lake to get the win there. But Freeman Marion Freeman Academy rolls. Hill City rolls. Hamlin rolls. Nothing too surprising to me on the top half of the bracket. Bottom half of the bracket, you'll see a lot more points for some of the teams. Elkton Lake Benton, rolling. Hanson, an upset win over Viborg Hurley, only one of two non-chalk, or I should say upsets, one of two upsets. Parkston rolling Bennett County. Bennett County scored a few late. Bonholm Gregory played a long game. It was a 3-hour game that finally ended with Bonholm winning that game, but the one we're talking about, Hanson and Viborg Hurley and the Beavers going to Hurley, knocking off the Cougars, and this was a good game. It just really was, and I was impressed by Hanson, who put up 52 points against Viborg Hurley, who has not really struggled that much defensively this year. But now Hanson has that tough test going to play Elkton Lake Benton, which we kind of circled. We said whoever wins this game is going to have a good challenge against Elkton.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun to see how they shake up this week going up to Elkton, but Hanson went on the road last week, pulled off a win against a team that's been considered one of the best throughout the season in 9-man football. So now they just step up a little bit in a class taking on Elkton, who's really looked dominant so far this season. But it should be a good test. And Hanson, maybe they could pull off another upset. Who knows?
You never know. They're going to have their hands full. Colt Beck is a stud. And that Elks team had that big win over Hamlin 2 weeks ago. They're playing their best football right now. Let's move to 9A. And in 9A, we know Wall has been incredible this year. They 55-0 Lemon McIntosh. Castlewood beats Dupree. Phillip rolls past Esteline Hendricks. And Ipswich rolls past Harding County Bison. Moving into the bottom half of the bracket, Warner continues to roll. 30-point win over Timber Lake. 20-point win for Howard. I knew there'd be a lot of points in that game because of how Centerville can score it, but they just couldn't stop Howard's offense. Alcester Hudson blanks Dubrook area, and Platte Geddes gets a win over Lyman by 12 points. And so I'll tell you what, you look at this part of the bracket, we'll talk more on Thursday, but that Warner-Howard game, Ian, should be a really good football game up there in Warner. But we've talked about Alcester Hudson so many times today, this season, I should say, on this show, and the Cubs blanking Dubrook area 36-0. I've liked what I've seen from them, and their defense seems to be trying to figure it out right now, which is a good time because they got a good Platte Geddes team coming in.
Well, you always hear the old adage defense wins championship. But, Grant, throughout the season when we've talked about Alcester Hudson, it's been about the tough schedule that they've played. It seems like every week we're saying, look at this tough game that they had this week. Look at this tough game that they have next week. And now that schedule is paying dividends for them. It's helping them as once it's playoff time, every game's going to be a tough one. Well, they're already battle tested throughout several weeks of the season. So now they're maybe shining and peaking at the right time, and their defense certainly a big part of that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I'll be intrigued to see how they do, right? Now it's going to get a lot tougher, and they got a good Platte Geddes team coming in. Like you said, that's where that battle tested comes in. 9B, and this is another one of those classes where I said the top 4 teams probably could have got a bye, and I'm not trying to knock the bottom 4 teams. It's just it's really hard to travel across state sometimes and wins in those big games. But Del Rapids St. Mary's 72-6 over Irene Wakanda. Kadoka area losing to Corsica Stickney, the only upset in 9B in the first round as the Jaguars keep their season going. Now they got to go play that tough Cardinals team. Faulkton area was pretty close with Burke early, and then Faulkton area went on to score like 40 straight points and pull away. Sully Buttes beating Hitchcock-Tulare in that game pretty convincingly. And then in the bottom half of the bracket, Avon 50-0. Sioux Falls Lutheran had a close start the first quarter, a little slow start, and then they just rolled. Coleman Egan rolling to a 50-0 win. Harriet Selby area, one of the few close games in the class, but still they controlled it, winning 22-0. And talking about that Del Rapids St. Mary team, it was 40-0, 5.5 minutes into the game. They just dominated that contest, and right now they just have the right pieces. They got a couple of big guys up front and premier players like Lincoln LeBrun and this guy, Tremere Hansen, who can either run you over in LeBrun's case or run past you in Hansen's case. They're really hard to beat right now.
You have the two different dynamics there with running the football that you said that makes them so much fun to watch. They're a lot of fun to watch, just as I said, and they're going to be a really tough out for no matter who they stack up against in the playoffs as we continue to move forward into the quarterfinals now. And yeah, it'll be fun to see who can give them the best game throughout the next couple of weeks.
Well, and I'll have to pull the stats, but I'd like to see how the 1 through 4 versus 13 through 16 stats look. Just looking at it, you can't tell me that each team's not averaging a 40 to 50 point win. And so it's like, is that worth it? Should we see buys there? I don't know. Maybe that's a conversation for another day. It certainly is today because we're running low on time. We're going to wrap up today's show when we come back to Sports Zone All Access. Welcome back to Sports Zone All Access. Before we go here on this Monday, let's tell you what's coming up tonight on KELOLAND Sports. Ian is going to have a story with some reaction from SDSU and NDSU, and I'm sure very polar opposite reactions coming from that game. I'll be intrigued to see what both teams had to say after this one. I don't think either team expected that to happen.
No, we see every year this game is always tightly contested, and this year not so, but who knows? Maybe they'll square off again later on in the season.
It's very, very possible. SDSU had a couple of former stars, Dallas Goddard, Tucker Kraft, that did well. We'll hear from them coming up tonight. And then we'll also have highlights from a really good volleyball matchup, a ranked one, Sioux Falls Christian versus Lennox. Well, thanks for joining us here on Sports Zone All Access. We'll see you on Tuesday.